Okay, we're live. Hello, I'm Zara.
Hi, I'm Fatema.
And we're back.
I am Mustafa.
Yes. We have the same guest speaker in our second episode. And
Okay, so the second episode follows off from the first one, which was about religion, especially about Shia Islam, and we covered a lot about the important male figures in Islam, essentially. But I think for this one, we wanted to focus a bit more on the important female figures, and I know Zara has a very connection, which she will elaborate on. So, Zara, go
okay,
ahead.
so basically for me, should I give the whole backstory? Okay, I'll give the backstory. It's more fun. So I started doing hijab when I was like 9, right? My parents asked me, they were like, do you want to do it? I was like, yeah, sure. Because I didn't really know much. I didn't know what it meant. In the last podcast, we kind of cover a bit of it that, as you grow up, you start asking questions and you kind of redefine your religion and make it your own. And I think my whole journey became that with hijab because when I was 13 or 14, I was like, why am I even doing this? What does it mean? I didn't have any role models. The only people who do it around me at that age were my mom and my grandmother. And for a 14-year-old, that generation, like, it didn't make sense. I didn't know who to look up to or what it could even mean per se, right? Because without meanings, things kind of start to fall flat. And I think that's when I started like discovering all of these things. And I realized that it was like the biggest symbol of bravery, of strength, of like the same word, loyalty, of power per se, at least when you talk about Bibi Zainab at Karbala, because for me, that link became so strong that I was like, this is what I choose to do, not because I was told to do it. I choose to do it out of respect to her and what it meant to them. And like we were talking about Karbala and the events,
Okay,
but
can you elaborate on that?
like,
I want you to elaborate why is there such a strong link with the hijab and with Bibi Zainab and with Karbala, especially for you?
okay, I think for that you need to know the story of it, and one of you will tell it better. So, who's going to do it? If you tell the story, I can show the link.
Okay, fine, Mustafa. Why don't you do that?
Yeah.
Basically, I don't think it begins specifically at Karbala. The role of powerful women in Islam. If we're talking about that, right? Like,
Yeah.
I think it began with the first woman that embraced Islam, which was Hazrat Fatema. And it's widely known that she was well over the age of the Holy Prophet. She was a businesswoman. She was so rich. She was called Malakatul Arab, the Queen of Arabia. She was that good at business, right? She is also known as Tahira, the pure, right? Regardless of her uh, having a previous marriage, she is the wife of the Holy Prophet, and then from her and the Holy Prophet, we have Bibi Fatma. And Bibi Fatma is perhaps the first woman in Islamic history, at least, to have stood in a court and been like, where are my rights, right? Like, this is history, this has happened, right? So that, and then we have Bibi Zainab in Karbala, which is just a whole different extreme that shows not only the bravery in women and their strength and the character embodied by these women, it shows so much that women are play a very crucial role, an extremely crucial role in Shia Islam, and they have throughout history. Like, there is no doubt about this.
So that's like that's really important, and like I'm cutting across, I'm so sorry, but like the whole point of women having such a major role is really important. But especially I think in terms of Karbala and the tragedy there, the women really represent the actual atrocity that were carried out, right? So
Definitely.
once everyone was like, all the shaheed were like, they were gone, they were killed, they were like martyred. After that, the real like tragedy, the real zulm that was carried out was on the women, right? And the whole fact of the hijab or covering comes in was because they weren't allowed to cover, as in their chadar or their like covering. They were completely snatched off. They were chained together. They were tied in literal chains of metal chains, and like their hands were in ropes, and they were like dragged across. They were, you know, a lot of uh, torture was carried out on them, right? But the main point was that they did not have the choice to cover themselves. There's one like narration which is like they covered their faces with their own hair, because obviously imagine like your entire family has been killed in front of you. You are being publicly humiliated. There's an obvious amount of like sexual harassment and like torture and like humiliation that has been carried out. People look at you a certain way, they eye at you a certain way, and this is something that women go through every day, right? But this is especially like the family of the prophet, like, so you can imagine the kind of shame and the kind of like how horrified they must be feeling, right? At that kind of explicit like sexual nature that people must be viewing them in, and like making fun of them and just torturing them, right, and abusing them. And in that whole thing, they weren't given the option to cover themselves, to protect themselves. And that
Okay.
is the very real link that is there.
The narrations also go like that these women were in their like tents, right? And then they put the tents on fire, and they were
Yeah.
kind of essentially forced out of their tents or homes or whatever, into a land filled with bodies of their family who had just died, into a land filled with men that they know hated them, into so much atrocity, right? And you have to also kind of put into picture the power of these women before, like he said, because these are the symbols of, Islam in the female side, and also the symbol of hijab or whatever it could represent, like modesty per se, or the values that they had. Because see, without them there wouldn't be like a lineage, right? Like for example, Bibi Fatma is there, and therefore we have Imam Hassan, Imam Hussein. So you can imagine her power and her like knowledge also, because she's also married to Imam Ali. She's the daughter of the
Which is
Prophet.
also another thing entirely, is
Yeah.
that so you have a lot of like the divine masculine, which is like the importance of the male figures in Islam, right? But for some really convenient reason, there's like no mention or total wipeout of like the divine feminine in Islam, right? Which is very much there because you have such important female figures in Islam who are essentially like the backbone of everything. Like you said, Bibi Fatima, without her there would be no continuation, no lineage to carry on. She is literally the person who carries on, joins the family between Hazrat Ali and the Holy Prophet, and there's a continuation from that. And again, like Bibi Zainab and everyone in the family of the Holy Prophet, even the wives of the Imams, their children as well, females are always have played a very important role. It's just that people don't want to give the males any recognition, and then they actually very actively try to suppress the females or give them any importance. And it's just like, why is there no mention of anything that the females have done, even though they've been very powerful figures and have done a lot.
Yeah.
Um, I would like to cut in here, and this actually reminded me of something you were talking about, Bibi Fatma being the source of the Imam's divinity, right? Not divinity to say that they were divine as in God, but divinity in the sense that they were divinely appointed individuals, right?
Yeah.
So there's this really popular thing in the Shia community that Sayyid should only marry Sayyids, right?
I've
A Sayyid girl cannot marry a non-Sayyid guy. It's very common. It's so common. I keep hearing about it, and it blows my mind because the entire source, the lineage of the Sayyids to the Prophet
It's
comes from a
her.
woman.
Yeah. I think that's a
Like,
very like social thing. It's also like a social cultural thing, right? You know, like this is what
yeah,
is
it
supposed
is.
to
It is.
happen.
It is
Yeah.
a cultural thing. It's not a religious thing. Like, it's not written anywhere. It's not commanded anywhere. None of the alims have ever issued a fatwa saying that. Right? It's solely a cultural thing, especially in the subcontinent.
Okay, that's obviously a very important point as well. But back to Zara and her point about the job and the continuation for that. Yeah, please go ahead.
Okay, so that's it is point of that, right? Like the females have had so much power, but then again, if you look at it, that they were dragged out of their space without any like protection. And if you like link those things to what is happening today, and you see what baby Zainab had to do to get her voice heard, and in a majlis, like then the narration said that she went to court of Yazid, right? And there is like prostitution happening all around her. There's, imagine this is the family of the prophet, who has a woman who has to be in a room filled with really nasty men. And after so much has gone down already, and the narration kind of says that she had to give a speech, and the way she gave the speech was so powerful that the entire court felt silent, right? And I like, you guys can add on to the story of what actually went down and what she said, but that moment of how she redefined what it could mean to be a woman, and how much power she had to be able to say all of that and maintain her grace, maintain her poise, maintain her stature as being who she is, and also share that amount of knowledge that has been passed down. That became such a strong symbol for me. And then, if you look at it, there's more links again. Like, for example, we were talking about Hazrat Abbas getting water, and he was getting it for the children, right? Like, for example, Bibi Sakina. And she's this 4-year-old girl who was literally went through the most like horrible times and literally died in a cave, right, in the darkness. She was put on fire, her earrings were taken off. And if the narrations say that if you hear that 4-year-old girl, she didn't let someone else touch her to put off the fire also. That's the amount of knowledge that little 4-year-old girl had. And if you hear the stories about how much modesty and how much like I don't know the correct word for it, but the kind of stature they had and respect they had for each other, for themselves, and for the entire community at large, and the love that they had was so much that it kind of became the symbol for me. And it became that symbol of, okay, I want to do this because it represents what they had to sacrifice, at that point. It was literally snatched from them. And it's such a, there's so many layers to it that get added on to like hearing this history for like 20 years of my life. So that is the actual like symbol. It's like the entire thing is all the women and how much they kind of had to go through to kind of put the word across that it's just wrong. Yeah.
So your hijab kind of transcends covering. It becomes a symbol of
Yeah.
like, I
See,
think it becomes a symbol of kind of like rebelling.
no, not even rebelling. In fact, it's like, for first of all, hijab translates not just to covering, it translates to modesty. So it anyone can choose the word, like in nowhere does it say that cover this specific way other than hadith. It's always about modesty. The word it translates to is modesty, right? So for me, what does modesty mean, right? Does it mean that I can wear a certain amount of clothes, or what, like how does that translate for me is the real question. It's not just about covering, because it's not about hiding, it's not about any of those things, but it's more like the way people see hijab now is turning into something like that. It's becoming a status of power, of a voice, right? that I can wear this and I have that voice. If you look at like what happens in like Paris, right, how it was banned and people were hit or things like that, if you relate those things, it's kind of like it's just an article of clothing, but it represents so much that, you know, there can be a literal ban for it, which, you know, so it definitely transcends all of that. It's
True.
just a symbol of voices. It's a symbol of power per se.
I think in modern, more like recent interpretations, and I think even for you, it's kind of like a stand against oppression as well, right? So it's
Yeah.
like my choice. Let me wear it the way I want to, however I want to, without any judgment being passed. You know, whether I want to wear it or not is entirely up to me. As in, no one else has a
Yeah.
say in what I do or should not be doing.
Yeah. But it, again, like I said, it's like if you add all the history to what happened that made it this way today, it's so powerful. Because again, it's not just covering, it's a whole symbol for so much more, you know. Yeah.
I think that's really interesting because I think you can make really interesting comparisons, like how Mustafa said that the first instance that Fatema had to go to court and again give a speech that I think literally made people cry in tears when she was demanding her rights and asking what had happened and where were, you know, her things taken and why wasn't she being given the respect and her rights that are due to her. And the same way that Bibi Zainab was in Yazid's court, right, asking that why were they being treated this way and her rights and the rights for, as in, so Imam Ali Zainal Abidin was there with them at the time, and her whole speech and act was to protect him, right? That was the whole point of Bibi Zainab even being there, was that she was the one who was going to be protecting the Imam and then the entire like caravan that was there. So there's always reasons behind why people or why even women, you know, have done certain things. It's always, again, like the whole concept is of in service of other people as well, right?
Yeah.
So it's like they have to take on so much trouble, so much pain, because they have to preserve something, to continue something, so that it benefits us essentially later in life, right? It became a symbol to you. For many other people, I'm sure it's a symbol for a lot of courage, a lot of bravery, and it transcends, I think, very real boundaries of pain that we associate. So the fact that you can even relate your hijab and your reason for wearing it with an event that happened like 1400 years ago really shows that it really holds true, and it's something that, you know, you've grown up listening to, hearing, and really believe in.
Yeah. Yeah. I would, what about you? Like, do you have any like symbols or like events that would relate to any of these things? Because, like, you know, in today's world we're all like asking for our rights. That's literally like Aurat March, right? We're literally asking for our rights. So if you draw those like analogies in a way or comparisons like to history, because history, like you said, repeats itself again and again and again, and the suppression of female in history has been so much, right? But then again, if you look at, and especially in like Muslim communities, right, like in our culture, in our whole thing, like he said, a Sayyid female cannot marry another, like anyone, right? She has to marry another Sayyid. Similarly, there's so many other things that get suppressed down. um I lost my train of thought. Wait.
No, it's true
Yeah.
because I think, and female suppression is nothing new. It's always been there. So if you think about it, like it's almost like this huge parallel you draw, that women who are so important, and it's not just in like, I think in the history of the world. So it's Islam, like in Islam,
Yeah.
women having that, and it's something so close to us. So I think it's okay if we talk about it in such depth. Is that people who we keep hearing about and their importance of, especially women, and we always hear that, you know, Islam grants women all their rights, but you even see women in Islam having to stand up and fight for their rights, is really powerful even now, because that's all you hear, right? Or
Yeah.
any retaliation to Aurat March is always like, oh, but Islam has given you all your rights, why do you need any more? And it's like, literally, can you
You
give
don't.
us our rights in the first place?
Yeah. And I remembered now. I was going to make that connection that, so like culturally, like for example, if a woman goes and marry, if she's older than her husband, it's such a Like, again, it's like very social culture thing that I'm talking about. But then if you look at the life of the prophet, right, and you look at how, you know, the Bibi Khatija was older, she was a businesswoman, she was a working woman, all of those things. And then you look at how
She was a divorcee.
yeah, that, and he didn't marry anyone else other than her in her life, like while she was alive, right? So things like that are so important in Islamic history, but when you look at societies and when you look at people and how opposed they are about these thoughts, it's kind of confusing, because on the one hand you will be like this, like, you know, spokesperson for like all things religious, but then when it comes to actually treating people with the same love or kindness, or, you know, whatever your religion is literally telling you to do, aka providing those rights, you fail at that. So it kind of starts a very different commentary of like, is what you're doing even like just in a way? Is it even Islamic? All of those things come up, right? Because it's technically just wrong. You can't do that.
It's true. That's
Yeah.
very true.
Mustafa,
Mustafa, would you like to
yeah.
add on anything to this?
Yeah, like you guys were talking about Shia Islam, women in Shia Islam being a sort of I wouldn't say rebellious, but a very staunch force in the ideology of Shia Islam. And I think that ideology is very much enforced in Shia Islam, like standing against oppression. Like if you see something wrong, you're going to be like, yeah, man, this isn't right. And because it has been ingrained into you from such a early period, right? That you know, Karbala was a fight against what was wrong, right? And because Karbala is such an important part of your life, you begin to see things like you know, this was wrong. The very simply the social justice aspect of it, right? That there are things in society that should not happen. People should not be able to rip people off. The rich should not be able to gain too much money. Women should not be oppressed. These things are very important in Shia Islam. Actually, I was reading a book a couple of months back. It's called The Shia Revival by Wali Nasser. And he said Shia Islam is inherently socialist. But like, and when you look at the Khilafat of Imam Ali, when his actual rule began, uh, like even like all hadiths from that era, all the history from that era says that Imam Ali did not benefit from his caliphate. He
Yeah.
he remained poor, right? And it's famous, you know, he would go give people food, he would eat old bread, stale bread, uh, he'd barely eat meat. All these things are there, right? And his justice, again, like as a court, in the court of law, was also again legendary, right? So it presents ideals for justice and for a system that perhaps is not the worst thing on earth, right? Like it's
That's
because
understating it a lot.
are a
It's
Shia,
yeah.
if you are a Shia, you believe that you know the Imam can do no wrong. They are masoom. They can do no wrong, right? Hence, their justice would always be fair,
That's true.
right?
But I think there's a lot of what do you call it? As in, there's a lot of narmai. So there's a lot of softness in injustice as well. So it's not always very harsh or very like I
It's
would.
based on
It's not. It's not
forgiveness.
harsh.
There's a
It is.
lot of
It's based on
forgiveness.
forgiveness.
Yeah.
As in,
Yeah.
the whole point is to change or to, you know, to change a certain narrative or a point of view for someone. So if someone's committed a sin, the point is not to punish them for punishment's sake. It is to, you know, kind of change their perspective or change how, or kind of, you know, purify them from a certain sin or a crime that they've committed. It isn't because you want to be mean or, you know, hateful towards them. that's not the reason they do it. It's actually very difficult for someone, I think, even especially the imams, but just for anyone in general, to be cruel to another person, is very difficult. So the point isn't to punish, it's to change.
It's also to
Yeah, I
inform.
completely agree. I
Yeah.
completely agree. They've their justice again is fair, and it is fair under God's law, right? And if you believe in a all merciful God, if you believe in Allah, who is Ar-Rahman and Ar-Rahim, uh, his divinely appointed his divinely appointed individual would not make, he would not ever leave the option of the forgiveness, right? Like if someone forgives, yes, you are forgiven, right? Because that would translate to the justice of God. Like you cannot, because they are again divinely appointed. It's hard to explain how it would translate, but I hope I can like make you guys understand.
As I think it's this whole concept, like how in Islam especially it said that sins committed between you and God are always forgiven, right? As in God will always forgive those sins. But sins committed between you and the other person forgiving you, and I think that's the whole point of this, is that sins that you commit against the state or against certain rule of law, especially against someone else, like stealing from someone or whatever, has a lot of heaviness attached to it because it's upsetting to someone else, and that requires forgiveness from another person, which is why the court of law is so strict for these things. But again, it functions on a very large base of forgiveness, and it functions on a basis of that. When you look at the imams, you think that okay, they are God's appointed, like they're appointed as the leaders, and so they take on the burden for a lot of things, and that's why they are so forgiving, because they say, what, we'll take on this for you. And so the only time they really punish you essentially is if that it's the right thing to do. That is the whole point of it.
And
Yeah,
I wanna link it to like the thing that we were talking about, like service also, right? That it's not just limiting to the justice aspect, right? Because again, like for example, Bibi Fatma, when she got married, someone asked and said, do you have any clothes? And she had her wedding clothes, and she just gave that away. Things like that also are so, like Imam Ali, he used to go give food and at in the dark, so that nobody knew that it was him, so that they wouldn't feel bad. It's that
It used
thoughtful.
to be it used to be late at night.
Yeah, so so no one can
And it's the
feel
same thing. This was
ashamed. Yeah.
This
Yeah.
was Imam Ali Zain al-Abidin. And then
Yeah.
I remember, like, there was another incident with Imam Ali specifically in Ramzan, where he would be in the mosque and he would only have like, he just have like atta, like flour, right? And like as iftar. But then some traveler came, and he was really hungry, and he said, what, go to the homes of Imam Hassan and Imam Hussein. And when the traveler went there was so much food there, right? But then the traveler started crying. And when they asked, why are you crying? Do you have kids? Do you have family at home? And he said, no, that's not it. The fact is that there's so much food here, but then there's this man in the masjid who's only having, like a flour for iftar. And the imams knew that it was Imam Ali, that was their father. And, so they started crying as well. They said that he adopted such a simple and plain lifestyle of, like you said, of essentially of poverty, that it was incredible that he was the imam. There was a ruling, it was his caliphate, but everything he did was in the service of other people. That has been their entire essentially purpose.
It's quite powerful. It's like, because again, like we were talking about this, there's just not one thing that you can look at, right? There's so many different schools that you can look at when you talk about the justice system, when you talk about social rights, when you talk about female empowerment and rights, all of those things. There's so much law, all of it, right? That it's not just one aspect that they're forwarding with forgiveness, with love, with the appointedness that they've given, that and the knowledge that they've had. So it's kind of all of that together, and it's quite powerful. Like that's kind of why when you hear about it, it becomes so like you want to know more, because how can that even happen? It's so weird to think about that a ruler is poor, you know. It's quite cool to me. Yeah.
Yeah, no, for sure. I think it really sticks with you also, that's why. There's things you want to learn and the reasons they do certain things, and the kind of moral and ethical code they followed is just something you really want to know more about, things that you want to adopt in your own life as well.
Yeah. Okay, I think with this we're running out of
Yeah.
time.
Okay, so I think this is it, the second episode. So bye.
I love how we end this. Okay. Bye.